here. It's Thursday evening for some of us. It's Friday morning for some of us. So we're doing some time traveling within this Zoom itself. For those of you who are joining us on the chat, if you don't mind dropping in where you're dialing in from and what you're excited to learn about today, that would be great. And we'll get started in just a few minutes.
I'm envious of those of you dialing in from somewhere where it's already Friday. It's just one step closer to the weekend. It can't come soon enough.
A few more hours. Alex, okay?
Hey, welcome, Mike. We are just getting started here, and we have a couple of folks joining us from all over the world. We're hearing where they're dialing in from and what they're excited to learn about today. And we'll give folks maybe just another minute or two to get settled, and then we'll get started. Canada in the house, San Diego, nice. Hey, Lane. Hi, Edward. Oh, cool. Excited to hear more about the situation that you are that you're dealing with, and hopefully you can learn something, and then in the future we can learn from you. Cool. Alrighty. Well, let's do this. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. This is a part of Accelerate Energy series. So here at New Energy Nexus, as we are working to create an inclusive, diverse, and clean energy ecosystem, we really wanted to explore the different parts of the ecosystem that can really be advanced and evolved. And so we created a series of conversations starting in October, where we're touching on all aspects of the ecosystem, from markets to policy to culture, and understanding how we can collaborate more effectively moving forward. So today's topic is about collaboration between corporates and startups, because we know that these types of relationships can foster innovation and scale and really further the clean energy ecosystem in a way that is unimaginable. But hopefully it actually is imaginable, because we will make it happen in our lifetimes. So what we'll do is we'll just go around and do a brief round of introductions and hear a little bit more from our panelists. We'll hear some case studies about their experiences in the past. And towards the end, we'll have some Q&A for everyone. So if you're dialing in, you should see the Q&A feature at the bottom. Feel free to pass along your questions, thoughts, and comments as we go throughout the event. And at the end, we'll get to them. So with that, I would like to pass it to Kevin Self, if you'd like to share a little bit more about yourself and tell us why these collaborations are so important.
Sure, thanks, Neha, and welcome to everyone on the broadcast. So I am Kevin Self. I lead strategy, government affairs, and business development for Schneider Electric's North America business. We're about 7 billion of the 29 billion global revenues. Schneider began in France 186 years ago. So obviously for a company to survive this long, we ourselves have had to pivot a number of times over the years, and we're in the midst of another one now. We're an energy management and automation company, and very engaged on developing energy that's more digitized, more decentralized, and more decarbonized. We also believe that, clean, resilient, sustainable energy is an inalienable right, and the way it's being delivered today is not sustainable. And so we're looking forward to working with the new Biden administration to ensure in the US that we meet those goals. Neha, if you can just share that slide real quick. We launched 2 years ago an entity called Schneider Ventures, and I'll get into this to more of this later, but Schneider Ventures is our $700 million investment arm that we launched with 3 legs of the stool. One, to do direct investments. Second, to do investments into venture funds that then deploy the money. And the third is to run incubations where we take ideas, thank you, where we basically take ideas, lift them outside of Schneider Electric, let them run for a period of time, and then determine, do we bring them back in or not? A company called EIQ Mobility, working with fleets who are moving towards electrification, is an example of that. And to the bottom of the page, focus very much on this new energy landscape, buildings and infrastructure of the future. As buildings become more electric, that plays into us, and as industry goes from 3.0 to 4.0, and becomes more efficient, another great opportunity. And at the top just lays out some of the companies with whom we've invested in. That's it for the intro.
Thanks so much. Brian, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, I'm Brian Guido Hassan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Third Derivative, which is a joint venture between Rocky Mountain Institute and New Energy Nexus. We describe ourselves as a vertically integrated or rocket ship of climate tech innovation. But I've spent most of my career as a climate tech entrepreneur, launching, leading, and scaling disruptive tech ventures, mostly at the intersection of energy and IoT, mostly startups, but some spin-outs from large corporates as well. So I've kind of seen this discussion topic from both sides of the table, and mostly North America based, but also some based in Europe and Asia as well. Corporate startup partnerships matter a lot, especially in climate tech, right? Climate tech startups often have long paths to market, significant capital needs. That's a challenge in and of itself. But if they can even surmount that initial challenge, often their path to commercialization and scale leads them directly through some complex, bureaucratic, slow-moving, risk-averse corporate entity as a customer or a partner or a pilot, or ultimately, probably in many cases, success as an acquisition by a large corporate. And it can take a year even just to find the right person to talk to within those types of organizations, not to mention getting a deal done. At the same time, corporates have a challenge too, right? Their boards, their CEOs are making these bold climate commitments. They know they're going to need to integrate new technologies in order to meet them, but they're just not organized to scour the globe for innovative technologies, test them rapidly, and then kind of deploy them, integrate and deploy them at global corporate scale. So this mismatch, it slows down the process of climate tech innovation at best, and at worst, we actually lose some really promising climate tech in the process. So that's why we built Third Derivative, really to bridge this gap, to bring together the corporates and startups and other key stakeholders to work together. We don't have quite as long a history as Schneider. We've been around for about 8 months, but in those 8 months, we've built a coalition of a bunch of global corporates, about $3 trillion of US of market cap worldwide, a bunch of VC investors, about $2 billion of assets under management to invest in startups. And we're just in the process right now of selecting our inaugural cohort of 50 startups from around the world, working across the range of climate tech, ranging from digital energy solutions to novel battery chemistries to interesting new mobility plays and everything in between. So definitely for the startup founders here on this call, please reach out to us if you're working on some innovative climate tech, and we're eager to discuss how you might be able to use corporates to your advantage.
Thanks so much, Brian. So much incredible work happening here. I'm already wondering how we're going to possibly touch on all the exciting things happening in this session. Andy, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and what your perspective is on all of this, and I'll go ahead and share your slides as well.
Yeah, thanks, Neha. So, good day to everyone. Good morning from Manila, Philippines. I'm Andy. I head up the Innovation Center of PLDT Enterprise. Next slide, please. PLDT is one of the largest telco business in the country. We are a diversified company offering telco and digital services. We are listed in the local stock exchange and the NYSE. Next slide, please. In terms of our initiative on sustainability, uh, we are seriously in pursuit of it. That's why in 2019, we created a group specifically for the sustainability programs of the company. We've done a lot. We've also earned the 2020 Sustainability Initiative of the Year Award by a US-based business intelligence group through our Gabay Kalikasan programs. Next slide, please. And we are, to show you our seriousness, we are focused on doing this not only for the company, but in terms of our product, for our planet, and for our people as well. Maybe later we could discuss this in details. Next slide, please. And as a telco, we are a member of GSMA, and we are committed into doing a net zero carbon emission by 2050. So there are a lot of initiatives. That's why we are working with Nexus today to find some startups who could help us in improving our, not only our operational efficiency, but also in using renewable energy and investing in other environmental projects to meet this net zero carbon footprint by 2050. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, in particular, I head up the PLDT Innovation Laboratory, which really is the face of our company in dealing with startups, not only for climate change, but also for business as well, giving these startups, not only local, but international, capacity or even a chance to get their products and services, their inventions to the market, where we could bring them as a product or even as a partner. Next slide, please. So really, we've been talking about digital transformation for the past, what, 5 or so years. So as a company, as PLDT Innovation, we would want to bring these startups to the new norm, or probably the norm that will be in a few months, where everything will be digitalized, everything will be online, even all the industries, even learning today is being online. Even what we are doing today could have been a face-to-face convention, but we are forced to do it digitally. So those sort of things, I think the startups of today will have a great part in doing this digital ecosystem of ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mike, where are you joining us from, and what are your thoughts on collaboration between corporates and startups?
Thanks so much for the introduction, Mia. I'm a principal at Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners. Sidewalk is a company that is really formed to partner with exciting new technologies that can be applied to really some of the traditional infrastructure verticals and asset-intensive industries that to date have faced specific challenges in becoming both decarbonized and digitized, as Kevin was referencing. So what our goal is really to apply capital and being an innovation partner to specific industries with companies, both to help them build technologies, but then also to provide really asset and project financing to technology companies that are, at a relatively early stage in their life cycle, and the bankability of technologies may be just emerging in some cases. And honestly, there's in traditional infrastructure financing really a lack or a desire to shy away from perceived technology risk, and really Sidewalk Infrastructure was formed to actually lean into these opportunities. We were created by Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, and Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, one of the largest infrastructure investors in the world. And what these guys did in coming together is to really to say, hey, how can we take a lot of the technology learnings that we have and try to put them to work in an innovative way in the infrastructure verticals like mobility, the energy grid, water, environmental services, waste and recycling, digital communications infrastructure. So a lot of the traditional infrastructure verticals, but considering how do we push the technological transformation, because we're actually firm believers that it's only through the pushing of the technology envelope that we're going to be able to deliver the outcomes around sustainability and affordability and other critical metrics that'll be possible. So really the way that I was, in reflecting on this panel, I was sort of thinking around, why collaborations are key from our perspective, and what I've learned in doing this, from the startups perspective, what I've seen a ton of is really smart startups trying to benefit from the scalability that corporate partnerships bring. Small startups often can gain, running pilots and then transitioning pilots to paid larger customers is a classic model. Being able to understand how to run collaborations like that, I think for innovative technologies is a really, really critical operational skill set. I think also, corporate partners are valuable because they have a lot of insight into stakeholder dynamics. I think startups and disruptors really benefit sometimes from sort of learning about those. I'd say, just as Brian said, there's a lot to be gained on both sides, where corporates have tons of problems that they're facing. And frankly, innovative technologies are one of many ways corporates are trying to solve those problems. And whether those are carbon neutrality commitments, circular economy commitments, all sorts of different problems that we're trying to address. In some cases, the commitments are preceding the solutions, and we have to work really hard to make sure that those are actually delivered on. And sort of the startup collaborations are really a critical tool in that ecosystem design or paradigm. So some thoughts. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we can hear from all of your perspectives, there are many ways that this can be a win-win-win for all of the stakeholders involved. And as you all reflect on some of the experiences you've had in the past, or some of the collaborations that have really shaped your approach to these partnerships, what comes to mind? What are some examples that we could perhaps learn from?
Yeah, so this is Kevin. I have one to share. As I mentioned, we launched Schneider Ventures about 2 years ago, and actually about a year and a half ago, we made an investment in a company called Sense, S-E-N-S-E, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A big issue in the electrical world that we've been dealing with for many years is load disaggregation. It's being able to understand exactly what in your home or ultimately in the commercial building is using the electricity and how much of it. We've been testing for a long time, and we came upon this company that actually was already solving this. And it's as simple as they put 2 C-clamps around the incoming lines into your circuit box and plug in the Wi-Fi, and it starts listening, sampling it 1 million times a second. And ultimately, it understands the differences between a signal of a Keurig coffee maker, from a pool pump, from a garage door opener, from a vacuum cleaner, etc. And it gets smarter as it goes on, right? Because it's learning from everyone else. And so what it's able to do is, step one is just to advise you. And obviously, people on this phone may not have that big of an issue, but if you're even lower income, the percentage of your pay that goes to energy is actually quite high. Summer of 2018, they actually ran a study with a utility in Vermont. They provided these devices to 300 people randomly, didn't say what to do with them, but just having these in their homes, the awareness drove down energy consumption of these 300 homes by 8%. So as you think about the future of energy, not having to turn on that peaker plant, being able to really step back, focusing more on the demand side is a great opportunity. So what we're now doing is we didn't just invest in Sense. We now are actually taking its capabilities and putting it inside our Wiser energy system, which you can purchase. And so what it does is it listens to your signal, and there's 3 potential steps. The first is it just makes you aware of what's being used. And if you do use this device, you'll notice there's a big bubble that's always on. There are phantom signals from all those old devices that we plugged in a long time ago, DVD players, going way back, VCR players. I'm sure no one has any of those anymore, but they just continue to drip electricity. And so the first is to advise. The second would be to recommend. It would, based on time of use rates and what it knows your schedule might be, it would recommend when you need to do something. Then ultimately it could take control. So by using the device in your home, you could have it turn on your washing machine late at night and knows you got to leave at 5 a.m. to get to your appointment. So it starts charging your car at some point. That's our ultimate vision. And we wouldn't have done that ourselves. We're doing that because of this partnership with Mike Phillips, the CEO, and his company.
I'd be glad to share out maybe an anecdote from the other side of the table. Over the course of my career, I've had a number of partnerships with major corporates, and a very distinctive story that I'll always remember came in a previous life when we had brought on Shell as a really marquee customer of ours. And I remember I was pretty early in my journey. I had a sales mentor. This was my first time being CEO of a startup, and he would always caution me. He said, "Brian, now remember, Shell is the type of company that can bankrupt you just trying to buy your product." And he was so incredibly right. At one point, we had an employee who was on site at Shell doing some training, and I received a notice that that employee had pointed out something that was unsafe at Shell. And Shell had this really strict policy about rewarding people pointing out safety issues, which makes a lot of sense. And so they wanted to give this employee of ours an award. Great, no problem. But they actually needed us to give them the award because of some bureaucracy that happened in between. And the award happened to be a $20 Shell gift card. So Shell needed me, the CEO of the startup, to go leave work, drive to a Shell gas station, buy a Shell gift card, bring it back and give it to our employee for the reward. It cost us more for him to get that award than it actually did. And that's one of probably 1,000 different instances of just kind of corporates running at a different pace and having very different priorities than startups do. And I say that with great love for Shell. I won't claim that we really solved how to kind of align the speed of startup with the speed or priorities of corporates in that moment. But over time, at a system level, we're figuring that out. Shell is now a partner of ours in the third derivative for exactly this reason, right? They are trying to engage with startups. They want to open source some of their innovation and partner in ways that might be harder for them to do organically inside. And we've got an incredible head of corporate partnerships in Elaine Shea. I think she's on the call right now. And she and her team are dedicated to kind of helping startups navigate that corporate bureaucracy. Well, frankly, we do that kind of for them so that they don't have to bump up against it, but also just as importantly, helping corporates kind of speak startup in a way that we can get everyone actually on the same page and being productive and constructive rather than everyone frustrated about goofy Shell gift cards.
Brian, if I may, I feel you, man. But I'm on the other side of the fence. I'm from the corporate. We've been at the corporate startup engagement probably 3-4 years from now. And yet we've been seeing a lot of bumps, a lot of challenges. We started with partnering for co-innovation, bringing what startup has at least to reshape it to be more corporate. But that's easier said than done. As you said, startups are moving as fast as they could. We at the corporate has a lot of processes, has a lot of to your term, bureaucracy, although it hurts, but it's true. So a lot of approvals. So the agility that these startups brings to the corporate is really a dream for us as innovators on the other side. But there are things that are beyond our control. So one example probably is what we did when COVID struck. We tried to bring in a startup partner who was a chatbot with an AI capability to quickly check our employees if they are good. At least this is still internal use, but we had problems with data privacy, cybersecurity. So those stuff are really needed, but really bringing us to not a standstill, but keeping us slow to the pace of the startups. So most of our partners are not really giving up, but uh, getting their patience or being impatient in waiting for our approvals, for our growth signal. So that's where we are up to now after 4 years. But we are still trying to keep up with those startups. We are still trying to tap them to bring in new blood, to bring in new innovations within an old tech company. That's what I can share. Thank you.
Uh, Maybe I'll share a particular category of collaboration that I think we see a lot of these days between corporates and startups that will be helpful for folks on the line as well. So Sidewalk as an investment company is really often working with its portfolio companies or potential portfolio companies and understanding how they interact with corporates and frankly trying to often help those relationships become solidified and become optimized on both sides of the equation. One like broad category of collaboration that I would point people to is really as a ton of legacy businesses move onto the cloud in a lot of different ways, and we see a lot of businesses really relying on key cloud partnerships with folks like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. I think there's clear market leaders, but there's also folks that are trying to gain market share. And also folks that are trying to keep market share in that cloud business. It's extremely competitive these days, and folks are trying to put a lot of money into that. I would say that that's a great area where almost every company that's trying to grow today is in some form, like on the cloud, whatever, has a critical element of its technology stack that is sort of happening there. And we think that those are key partners, for example, that folks should be thinking about. Those cloud companies have access to tons of different customers that they are serving as well, and therefore you could really think of them as potential allies in trying to scale a business. If you've got a compelling technology, that's one example of the type of partnership that you guys, I think everyone should think about. I would say that in other areas, I would encourage folks to really think about trying to understand the elements of the incentives for their corporate partners. Obviously, if you've got a new technology, a new widget, or new service, you've figured out doing something more efficiently or better than the status quo or business as usual. I think the critical thing to realize with corporates is you can get them to move into action much more quickly if you're really identifying a true felt problem or cost. And so some of the key partnerships that I would say not only look into your operational stack for potential corporate partners, but make sure that when you are evaluating who's a potential partner, think really critically about who's a stakeholder in your industry that you could really move the needle for or make a difference with or be really critical to their corporate messaging and story and try to work into those dynamics. I would say one example to speak a little bit to that is we've got a portfolio investment in a company called AMP Robotics. AMP is trying to use artificial intelligence and robotics to make our recycling systems more efficient and frankly better in a lot of different ways. It's a really challenged industry right now for folks that might know about it. And, there's a lot of potential corporate partners that actually have helped get that technology into the market through things like educating the customer set, through things like actually industry association groups that have been critical in the very early days. But understanding all the different potential ways that this could forms that this could take, it may not just be the standard way that folks may imagine as well. So those are some thoughts. Hopefully that's helpful, Nia.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd love to touch on a few things a little bit more deeply. So when we think about the relationship between these sectors, how do we also take that into consideration? And what comes to mind specifically, Brian, you told the story about Shell. And I think when we are also talking about things in the climate world, there are many different industries who may see each other as competitors, but actually are within the same realm of solutioning. So when we think about the collaboration there, and Mike, you were speaking a little bit about, how you decide what is a good corporate partner, how you can really get to scale as well. What do those decisions look like? What does that process look like?
I'll throw out a heuristic that has worked a lot for me and is actually borne out by a lot of entrepreneurial research as well. A good corporate partner is a partner that will kind of devote a lot to you, that will contribute a lot of resources, that will kind of share risk and put resources at stake with you. Like, it's important to understand that there's a fundamental misalignment in the way that startups and corporates kind of perceive risk. But a startup doesn't really have anything to lose. It's all upside. Like, if a startup gets a deal with a corporate, that can make the startup. If a startup fails to get a deal with the corporate, that can actually be an existential threat to the startup. From a corporate's perspective, and again, I have great sympathy for both sides. I've been on both sides of that table. They have everything to lose, right? So if a deal doesn't go through, no harm, no foul, status quo is okay. If a deal does go through, maybe there's some opportunity, but there's also, some risk. And that bears out in the actual practical way that startups engage with corporates. I remember in a previous startup, we were doing a deal with NRG Energy. Again, I have nothing but great things to say about NRG, but the procurement requirements from NRG, just for us to provide the product or service it required so much insurance to kind of protect them that it would have required us to increase our cost of insurance so much that it was completely uneconomical. So I don't have any kind of magic silver bullet on how to deal with that, but other than to recognize that the misalignment exists and have empathy for on the other side of the table. The misalignment is also good in many ways. Corporations bring so much additional resources to the table. So in the same way that getting a deal done could be an existential opportunity for a startup, that same amount of money might not matter at all to corporate. So in previous lives, I've actually funded companies by corporates essentially paying us in advance for products that don't exist yet, because it was a rounding error to them, but to us, it was the difference between getting our company funded and our product built or not. So there's kind of an arbitrage that can work here in which you play up the areas where that misalignment kind of works for the relationship, and you try to sidestep the areas where that misalignment is prohibited.
Yeah, I would say that we actually often emphasize the need to create mechanisms of alignment in these types of relationships, and what folks should try to figure out are what are the ways in which I can make sure that I'm succeeding when my partner is succeeding, and when I am feeling pain, my partner is feeling pain, so they are motivated to help me fix whatever is the situation. And so I think Brian great points about finding folks that are going to sort of, putting resources at risk is one version of an alignment mechanism, right?
Yeah, I agree with both Mike and Brian. the way we deal with startups today is just like any vendor out there, big vendors. So we require them with the papers on incorporation, even asking them for a financial statement. So there's really a gap. I don't know how to solve it, but so far we've closed several deals with 2 or 3 startups, and we brought them to market with us. The way we do it is that rather than treating them as a large vendor or supplier, we found a way to treat those small incorporated startups. And when accreditation is needed, we found a third party who would accredit them outside of our company. But with that accreditation, it is what our procurement would would see as an appropriate paperwork to get them into the system. So there's really a gap today on how we treat startups. So probably later on, as we learn, probably from you guys, we could bring in more startups and their solutions into our mainstream market. So there's still a challenge.
So when we think about that challenge, and for all the startups and the entrepreneurs who are also dialing into this session, what are the things that they should keep in mind? What would make it easier to have these conversations, to um, just have at the ready and know that whenever those negotiations are happening, it is good to have this on hand? And one question that I'm also seeing in the Q&A is that, are there any technologies that would require more convincing to invest in? Is there a rule of thumb? And so, as we imagine, okay, someone discovers this incredible startup, and there's the conversation that begins within the corporation itself. And they start being shared around. And what are the absolutely minimum required documents or things that should be readily available so that these conversations can be furthered?
Yeah, this is Kevin. So one of the things I would recommend is, when you're coming to have conversations with a corporate partner, is understand my business quite well. Try to identify where you think the pain is and where you're going to assist. How are you going to make my job easier? How are you going to make my customers' success greater? And how you can fit in. That's why, once again, the Sense example was so powerful. They realized it was an issue. We sort of found each other, and we already had a product on the market, but it wasn't delivering everything it could. And so combining their technology with ours, we think is a big win-win. And so realize when you do knock on that door, put that call into the strategic, and maybe with a bit of a different conversation than if you're just going to a financial partner.
Yeah, on our side, probably on what Kevin said, anything that will address the current pain points of our customers. As a telco, we provide the connectivity, so anything that would be on top of that connectivity, value-added services, over-the-top services that we could go to market together, that's good. On the paperwork, of course, at least an incorporation would be good. What we could do is bring them with our services together in the market.
A few comments here to your question. I would add to what Andy just mentioned. I think, with some of these corporates, you'll really only get one bite at the apple, so to speak, and you should be really having all your documents and questions able to be answered. You should really, kick the tires and have others try to kick the tires in advance of those sessions for sure. And I would also say that, if you are a startup in this position, you really should try to generate a competitive tension and try to figure out, really do your homework on your market mapping of who is in the space that your, potential partners represent. To take the example that I had with the cloud providers, that there's multiple cloud providers that you could effectively try to play one off one another. They're eager for, exciting technologies to host and work with. They are willing often to put, for example, business development type resources to help startups grow. Is there an opportunity anytime that startups can generate a little bit of pressure on corporates to act and make it feel like there is someone else who might do something similar? And sometimes getting folks out of the like, oh yeah, that's an option, we can do it at any time, and trying to get them to like, oh, this is a startup that's moving very quickly and we need to figure this out now, and this deserves our attention sooner than later. A lot of creating these partnerships is about sort of cracking that code for the startup and making that sense of urgency and competition a real thing for folks.
From a practical perspective, I've always found that networking matters a lot. If you're going to succeed as a startup in building a partnership with a corporate, you will need at least one strong champion within that corporate who's really going to advocate for you. Again, coming back to the notion of risk, like doing a deal with a startup will get very few corporate employees hired, but if it goes wrong, it could get some corporate employees fired. So they really need to believe in you. And in many cases, it's not just one, but actually several people, decision influencers and decision makers, that will need to advocate for you and sign off all around. And kind of like raising money, right? The time to start networking with an organization you're trying to work with is many months before you actually need to work with them. There's some related advice though around raising money. That's a reason why it's helpful to bring in investors. If you are funding your venture with external capital, bring in investors who can do much more than write a check, but who have networks, who have experience in the industries and the companies where you want to engage. That can bring a lot of additional value beyond just the check that they write, and it can bring you some credibility if you're not terribly well networked in those areas. That said, I also find many entrepreneurs are really kind of shocked and surprised at the kind of timelines involved in getting a deal done with a major corporate. And there are, corporates that are finding ways to change their processes to deal with startups in a better, faster, stronger way, but it still is often very shocking to entrepreneurs. So I'd encourage entrepreneurs to be realistic about what those timelines and even those capabilities are, right? As a startup CEO, within the small context of your startup, you kind of have absolute power to do whatever. But even a CEO of a major corporate doesn't have infinite power. Is restricted by, the public markets. Is restricted by compliance. It's not uncommon that a CEO will say, "Yeah, this is a great startup. Go work with them," but the deal never comes through because that kind of autonomous rule doesn't really happen. So be realistic. Line up your resources well in advance, and then push on them, help them work for you.
That's great. So I did hear a mention of risk a little bit, and I want to focus on that for a moment. I think we can spend a lot of time thinking about the theoretical, perfect collaborations, while also knowing that it is case by case and everything is variable. So I see this question that came up, and it's about IP. So our participant asked, I guess building the trust with your corporate partner as well as win-win situations is a must. Is the concern of losing the IP to the big corporate a myth, or can that actually happen, or has it happened? I have heard this a lot, and that IP is useless unless you can defend it in court, and obviously a startup cannot do that when the other side is a giant corporate. Thoughts on risk and IP, knowing that startups and corporates have very different abilities and resources to be able to defend IP.
Yeah, look, at life is full of trade-offs. And, in a perfect world, the startup would want 100% control, the ability to buy it 100% back, and don't have to give anything away. The other end of the spectrum, the corporate wants the same thing, and so thus is born negotiations. And so look, you need to find a point in the center where it's going to bring value to both of you. I mean, if in fact you never look to get in bed, 100% of nothing is still pretty small. And so, there's where the trade-offs will have to go. And, it's also a speed to market. You may be able to keep it yourself and, finally get to your aspiration, but how long, how much time, how much additional risk? Because you're not working with a company that, has channels to market, has relationships. So I think it'll be somewhere in the middle, but I do believe from my experience that you'll need to back off that a little bit.
I was going to say one thing that, in my experience, corporates don't get into partnerships with startups with like nefarious intentions of sort of getting their IP and controlling it. I think that it's really easy to be on the outside looking in and be very suspicious, but, people at corporates that I've sort of been lucky to work with, that's literally never the approach ever. So I feel like folks should negotiate their legal documents and their rights really carefully and work on term sheets that spell out all these details in a lot of specificity so that there's never any surprises. But I do think that corporates are hoping that IP can generally be generated by startups, and if a corporate has uniquely or in a proprietary way created opportunity that made that breakthrough possible, then I think it's absolutely a reasonable request to see if there, what form that sharing and alignment takes can be in a lot of different ways. It doesn't need to be co-ownership of IP, but I do think that everyone should be aware of like the value that each party is bringing to the table. Corporates bring scale, corporates bring credibility, but technologists bring innovation and often IP. So like Kevin said, that, people got to think carefully about some of these risks.
Based on experience, we haven't had any issues on IP because how we deal with startups today, at least as we are starting, is mainly on partnerships. So probably if there's really a unique value prop on that startups, and then we intend to buy them, probably only then will the IP be raised with a possibility of buying the company in itself.
I'll just throw out that most empirical research about entrepreneurship indicates that entrepreneurs who are more open and less secretive and closed tend to be more successful, right? The business of entrepreneurship is inherently fraught with risk. So doing things to kind of reduce your risk as an entrepreneur is, often sort of a counterproductive move. I guess in the global scale, my sample size is relatively small, but in the dozens of ventures that I've either founded and led or where I've been on the board, I've never witnessed an instance of a corporate kind of screwing over or stealing IP from a startup. More often, I've witnessed a corporate desperately wanting to work with a startup, but kind of having a hard time getting out of their own way, having a hard time selling others within the corporate that the risk is worthwhile and they can make it happen, et cetera. So my proposal would be, you've got to, as an entrepreneur, you've got to do what you're comfortable with. At the end of the day, that power is in your hands. But I would suggest gently that you should err on the side of seizing opportunity rather than protecting yourself from risk.
Yeah, thank you. I also noticed that the notion of IP and also the industry that we're in and the time that we're in just the history of the universe. When we think about having collaborative solutions for the climate and our planet and for all people, it makes me wonder what the world of IP even looks like decades or centuries from now. Because inherently, I think many of us are driven to want to collaborate, and we're wanting to make solutions more available to more people. And so I'm not sure, what this will look like as we move forward. But as I think about having an inclusive, diverse, equitable, and collaborative clean energy ecosystem, it makes me wonder if questions like these might even be no longer relevant. And that also might be me projecting a bit and hoping that we have such cooperative and harmonious systems in the future that we're all very excited to be utilizing different levers and tools and solutions where we see that they are most appropriate. So a couple of just thoughts before I open this up to the Q&A, and I see we have some great questions lined up. Keep them coming for those who are watching. When we think about not necessarily mistakes or risks, but things, what war stories might you have from the past, or what things that your past self did that you would want to share with those who are watching us today? I think we talked about what ideal scenarios might look like. What is the other side?
I'll just share a slightly different version of some of the anecdotes that I've already put out there, because it's something that I see over and over again, especially with younger or first-time entrepreneurs. They become very enamored with the idea of selling to, partnering with, being invested in, being acquired by a major corporate. They kind of throw all of themselves into it. They don't have realistic expectations about A, how long it might take to get a deal done, or B, what the actual likelihood of that deal is getting done. It turns out they're not actually talking to anyone with kind of check signing authority, or it turns out they're talking with someone who's really enthusiastic but isn't an ultimate decision maker. And they spend a lot of the one thing they can never raise more of, time, going down a rabbit hole that ultimately doesn't lead to fruition. And I don't think that's their fault per se. It's not the corporate's fault per se. I mean, I think in general in these cases, the corporates are genuinely interested in trying to get a deal done, but it's very important, I think, for entrepreneurs to have realistic expectations about what engaging with a corporate might look like, and to, not kind of put on blinders to everything else. Because while they're busy trying to get that, putting all their bets on that deal, they're often, the rest of the business is suffering.
Any other stories, things that your past self did that your future self has learned from, or things that you've witnessed that you hope?
Get it in writing. I'll tell you one thing, like, potential channel partners and, folks that are going to help with marketing. Oh, we've got all sorts of, things that we can help young corporate startups with, and young startups with, and we're a big corporate, and, trying hard from a big corporate might mean very little, and folks should make sure that they get commitments, try to pin corporates down with exactly what they're going to do for startups, and not, let there be some, cheerful and positive, supportive person in the company, in the corporate, who might be really excited about a partnership, but maybe what is the teeth around the agreement with a corporate, so they're like, is there actually definitely going to be value that made that a good use of the startup's time? It's just something to be really thoughtful about.
Yeah, just following up on Mike's comment, making sure that, in your exuberance of having conversations with this company, truly thinking through, are you really talking to the right person? Are you talking to the person that actually can make the deal happen? Or is it someone that just has a lot of enthusiasm, but an inability to really get it done? Because I think with Brian's point about time, you can't get it back. And so how do you ensure that you're being most effective?
And actually, maybe even just to piggyback on that, you may actually be talking to the right person who can get it done. But in corporates, people change roles all the time, much more frequently. So Mike, that's a great point about making sure to kind of lock in what you're talking about today, because you may be talking with someone else tomorrow.
The best intentions on a corporate, there's a team led by this nice individual who's extremely excited, and they've been maybe so successful they get promoted to a different role. All of a sudden you're talking to a different person, and they've got their own hobby horse technologies that they're excited about, and priorities can change. And yeah, definitely think that's a great point, Brian.
All right, thank you all. So we have about 15 more minutes left, so I'm gonna scan through some of the questions that we have here. Kevin Dobson asked, are there any technologies that will require more convincing to invest in? Do you have a rule of thumb for your ROI timeline or a hockey stick growth percentage that you need to maintain?
I would just encourage. Oh, go ahead, Kevin. I'll follow up.
Okay. I'd say it's the old, it's always dependent. I mean, I think to make a generalization of, you'll always need to grow at this rate is also, from my perspective, it's a bit naive. I think it's driven off of what's the problem you're trying to solve. For Schneider Electric, right, we're sort of in the center of the world becoming much more electric, transportation, the built environment. What's the solution you have that can fit into that, and how you fit that into our story is really what drives the value for us. So it's not as though we're looking at some 1,000% a year growth for the future. It's better, how is what you're doing going to slide into what our business is and make us more valuable to our customer base.
I'll just, when I saw that question, my thoughts were really around, two thoughts. When we look at these types of questions, is there a critical problem that's being solved that, solving big technology problems is so difficult that, like, you got to believe there's a huge market opportunity when you're doing it. So that's a one thing to keep as like a governor on all of their activities. But once you think that you are tackling a really huge important problem and you're looking for an ROI timeline, you've really got to consider the risks involved in whatever your solution is. If it takes me 2 years to build it, versus if it takes me 3 hours to implement it, that's a very, very fundamentally different type of solution for a customer. And I think ultimately different industries have different sort of ROI expectations. Certain industries are built around, very asset intensive approaches where people don't sort of bat an eye at a 6-year or 7-year payback for an energy project. In certain industries, if it's more than 18 months or 36 months, people are like, why would I use my money for that? So I think there's a lot of folks really need to immerse themselves in the sector that they're trying to solve the problems of, to understand the expectations of their counterparties and understand what the type of payback that customer is going to require to engage.
Yeah, if I may, mostly any proposition that will fit into the company's strategy, number one. Number two is mostly on the payback, the P&L that it will bring to the company. And lastly, of course, how soon it will be implemented. So mostly on those areas, no hard rule on the ROI itself, but most on the strategic intent of the services or the solution that it will bring.
We're in touch daily with dozens of corporates, and I would say a commonality of kind of a technology category where they find kind of greater risk and greater aversion to making an investment is any kind of technology that requires some kind of externality to come through in order for the technology to succeed. Other innovations throughout the supply chain or some kind of policy to support it. And that's especially a challenge in climate tech, where in many cases, the most disruptive climate tech, we actually have to kind of create new markets rather than just kind of iteratively innovate on existing markets. So just to toot our own horn a little bit at the derivative, that's why we exist, right? Let's take hydrogen. We don't know what success is going to look like for hydrogen, but the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so if we can get Shell and BHP and Microsoft and Wells Fargo kind of all to agree, hey, this is what success could look like for hydrogen, that opens up the possibility for them to invest in hydrogen startups. And by the way, we'll also bring VCs to the table to fund the financial risk gap to help them get to the level of maturity they need to be to actually engage with those corporates, engage policymakers to kind of grease the skids and really create markets. In climate tech, often I think together and only together with multi-stakeholders can we really be successful with the most disruptive technologies where there's the greatest opportunity.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue into a question that I've been holding for all of you. So we started Accelerate Energy series with imagining 2030. What does policy look like in 2030? What do markets look like in 2030? And I want to ask all of you, what is your dream collaboration that you imagine in 2030? It could be between certain sectors, industries, companies. If you were to have one special wish for 2030 collaborations, what would that look like?
I'll kick it off. I think it's actually, 2030 is like getting very, very close, especially as we look at actual commitments that corporates are making and trying to figure out ways of solving them. My ideal scenario, there's two things. One is that, some of the sectors that have been most resistant to collaboration and have been least successfully digitized and decarbonized, those are areas where there's a lot of wood to chop, frankly. And so I think that one version of success for collaborations is that sectors that were previously really corporate dominated and not able to attract significant startup because they weren't considered exciting enough, compelling enough problems to attract talented technologists to the issue, are able to bring their learnings to bear on some of those problems. And I would say, in particular, I think the built environment is a really challenging for technologists. We've seen a lot of innovation around software and the digital space, and obviously, for example, Alphabet is incredibly a big participant in that. But I think critical collaborations with some of the important legacy companies out there are going to drive actual outcomes around sustainability and affordability, and we should be sort of mindful of those hard to innovate businesses. So that's what I hope for 2030.
It's interesting as I look out 10 years, and in some ways, what we're living through now with COVID, and to Mike's point is the growth of digitization. I think about it as, what's the future of work and what's the future of a company? I mean, when you're at the point where really you should be outsourcing, all this energy as a service. So it's just sort of this core capability that you deliver. I think in that case, your whole R&D function could be a group of startup companies that are forming and reforming to solve a problem, sort of as independent agents that, solve the solution and then go away and solve another. So I think it's as much linked to the future of work, which I do think is going to be changing quite a bit over the next decade.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. I think this pandemic has pushed us to the brink of 2030 already. Everybody's trying to be as digital as possible. Even payments are being moved to your mobile phones. So I think it will come earlier than 2030. 2 points that I wish would happen immediately is in terms of sustainability. As a telco company, we are heavy on our carbon footprint, but we are starting to evolve. We're tapping into solar energy. We're tapping into Nexus to help us be more efficient in our power hungry data centers, cell sites, and such. Number two, hopefully big companies like us uh, will be able to work hand in hand and efficiently with the startups. Hopefully we get their agility as part of our ecosystem. That should happen sooner than later, as we see a lot of technologies coming in from the startups, not really being developed or even thought of in the large companies. Those ideas should come in easily and fast within our ecosystem as a large company. So hopefully that should happen earlier than 2030. That's my wish. Thank you.
So as someone who spent his entire career mostly focused on the digital aspect of kind of the digital intersection with energy, maybe it's just that the grass is greener on the other side, but I would hope for a robust supply and value chain built around carbon capture and utilization. So pulling CO2 out of the air at massive scale and not storing it, not having it be a cost center, but actually building incredible materials to displace very carbon intensive materials like steel, concrete, cement, et cetera, for buildings, so that we get to work on both sides of the equation at the same time. In parallel, I would love to see a robust collaboration between the governments of China and India and the US and the EU, maybe the UK if the EU would have them, adequately pricing that carbon to really kind of set the economic guide rails to ensure that the value is captured and the costs are captured in the correct ways. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but I don't know. Current political context makes me hopeful and optimistic about the future.
Yeah, may it be so. I hope that we do work towards those collaborations and those partnerships and those sort of the untapped potential that we're seeing left and right. And I think that all the things that you all have shared today will allow us to do that in a much more efficient and fun manner. As we sort of close in on the last few minutes here, are there any final thoughts or things you'd like to shout out to the folks who are following along?
Neha, if I may, and I think I've shared this in my previous talks. I think if fuel or gas or diesel was fueling the economy before, I think the pandemic has started to push us as internet will be the next fuel of our economy moving forward.
I would just say
what I said earlier. Oh, go ahead, Kevin, I'll follow up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the world is in need of even better solutions. So we obviously haven't figured it all out yet. So continue to innovate, and once again, rally it around the specific problem that you're solving.
Yes, I'll reiterate kind of two things that I said earlier, but maybe put a finer point on it. One is, again, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And we have to kind of co-create success here. No one knows exactly what the sustainable, prosperous, equitable energy future looks like, but we can all do our parts to co-create it. And the other is just that we don't live in a siloed world, not siloed geographies, not siloed countries, not siloed companies, not siloed portions of the value chain. Together and only together will we solve climate. So be open, do what you're doing, but also reach out, develop partnerships. Maybe they're not fruitful today, but they could be tomorrow.
Great. Thank you all so much. I know I've certainly learned a lot over the past hour, and I hope that everyone following us along has also learned a bit and at least had fun along the way. Again, this is New Energy Nexus's Accelerate Energy series, and I'll drop a couple of links here in the chat. But just to sort of show you all how you can follow along the series itself, we've created a Miro board. So as we explore the inquiry, how do we accelerate the global clean energy startup ecosystem to be diverse, inclusive, and economically empowering, we set up a series of conversations. And we started off with, oh, let's not get dizzy here. We started off with imagining the clean energy ecosystem of 2030. Then we talked about startups catalyzing energy access in emerging markets. Then we explored the interaction between policy and energy innovation all around the world. We have a session around climate fintech where we'll share our inaugural report around the ecosystem of climate capital catalysts and blended finance and all the different levers that we're seeing there that will help us advance the clean energy ecosystem. Today, we talked about best practices for collaboration between corporates and startups. And as we move into next week, we'll talk about what it means to engage family offices and next-gen investors. We'll talk about best practices for incorporating an equity lens into entrepreneur support programs. And then we'll bring it all together and reflect and understand, what does it mean to have best practices for accelerating clean energy ventures? And if you'd like to see and catch up on past events, feel free to check out the Miro link in our chat. You can watch all of the live streams here. You can see what was imagined when we think about the clean energy future of 2030. What does policy look like? What does finance look like? And you can follow along as we explore all the other aspects of the ecosystem as well. So I'd like to give a huge thank you to Kevin, Brian, Andy, and Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your learnings. Thank you for bringing yourselves and your presence to us this evening and this morning, wherever you're dialing in from. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. I'll hang on for a little bit longer. But for those of you who are in the end of your evenings or beginning of your days, feel free to drop off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Neha, could I wish everyone a joyous and prosperous Diwali?
Yeah.
Diwali. Take care, guys.
Nice meeting you guys.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.